Cool. It's just us now, right? We're ready to go.
I think it was supposed to do a countdown, but it didn't happen. But let's do it.
Go for it. All right, I'm going to do my fancy scene change. I'm a cat. Hi, everyone. We're Black Swan. I'm Calum.
You're
ready to go.
Countdown.
Oh, I hear a little bit of an echo on somebody's stream.
Is it fixed?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
So let's all introduce ourselves. Who do we have with us today?
Who wants to
Start, Laura?
start? Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Lotti. I'm a researcher based in Berlin, and I'm interested in relations between technological, economic, and cultural systems. And I've been working on Black Swan with Calum Bowden and Penny Rafferty. I am a white woman with long hair, glasses, and a black shirt. Leith or Calum?
Yeah, I can go. So I'm Leith. I'm a designer and researcher based in the Netherlands. I'm currently completing my MFA at the Sandberg Institute. I'm French, and I'm wearing a black cap, a black fleece, and a white t-shirt, and I'm a brown man.
And I'm Calum Bowden. And right now I'm coming to you as a 2D black cat with a pink mouth and pointy ears. And I am a researcher and designer who co-founded Trust, which is a collective project in Berlin that focuses on relinking infrastructure to imagination. And I also have been collaborating with Leith, Laura, Penny on Black Swan, which we'll introduce a bit today. But the main thing we'll be doing is discussing a text. And just a bit of housekeeping before we get started, though maybe this is slightly less relevant since the main focus is on Twitch, but anyone in Zoom, your name will be visible if you write a comment. And so yeah, just so everyone knows that this is being recorded, and we encourage participation, but we want everyone to know that this is going to be recorded and archived. And yeah, we really encourage discussion and questions, and please write comments, thoughts, reactions. We've shared a link to the Notion document that we'll be using, and I'll post that again in the Twitch, and you can follow along the text that we're going to be reading. But yeah, just to encourage participation, really. So I'm going to give a bit of an introduction to Black Swan before we get into the text. And Black Swan is a collective project that started really in 2018 as a response to the increasing precariatization of cultural workers, particularly in Berlin, where most of us were based, but these learnings can definitely be expanded to other cities. And the focus of the project is to try and develop new funding structures and organizing techniques for artists and creative practitioners, particularly those that revolve around trust, who maybe don't fit neatly within the existing infrastructures of the art world or of creative practice. So it's about thinking what we can learn from the development of peer-to-peer or decentralized technologies like blockchain, and use that to reimagine how artists relate to each other, work together, share value, and ultimately redistribute the value created through creative process. In the past year, Black Swan hosted a series of role-playing exercises to first look at different ways of making collective decisions. And we like to approach technological development through play and through role-playing, and have been testing some of the assumptions kind of embedded within different aspects of whether it's blockchain or in online communities through an experimental process. I don't know if Laura, did you want to add anything on the experiments and the methodology?
I think you covered it pretty well. Yeah, the core of our methodology is really beginning to deploy these mechanisms, like mechanisms that have to do with blockchains and DAOs, to see how they may work to support existing communities and forms of organizing. Yeah, that's it.
And we, from these role-playing exercises in the past months, have designed in collaboration with Leith an app that will enable communities to signal the things that they're interested in together, using a voting mechanism called quadratic voting, which we won't talk about today, but there are some other videos on the Trust Twitch where we go into it. And yeah, hopefully in the next months, we'll have a working prototype of this app, and begin to test out ways of making collective decisions in the trust context and beyond. So stay tuned. And now for the text today. So in our research, previously we were looking at decision-making mechanisms and different ways of making decisions. And for the next steps of the Black Swan research, we want to really look at different organizational forms and break down some of the assumptions that are maybe embedded in our context when people are thinking about preferable organizational forms. Currently, there's a lot of discussion around guilds, like looking back towards trade guilds, merchant guilds. And with Black Swan in the next months, we want to try and break down different organizational forms and think about what we can learn from them and how that might inform the creation of digital organizations or tools to allow creative communities to organize differently. And so key to this research is a text by a Japanese philosopher called Kojin Karatani called The Structure of World History, which takes the Marxist paradigm focusing on modes of production and changes that to look at modes of exchange. It's not seen as, or Karatani doesn't try and get rid of Marx. It's not a critique of Marx in that sense, but it's trying to, in his words, finish Marx's project and tries to rethink the structure of world history from the perspective of modes of exchange to do this. It's a long book to discuss in this format, but there's a really nice introduction and summary by the philosopher and media theorist McKenzie Wark that we're going to read extracts from today and open up for discussion, both with everyone present in the Zoom, so Laura and Leith, I guess, and myself, and then we'll try and respond to questions in Twitch as well. Did I forget anything, guys? You ready to go? Ready to go. And the way it works is we're going to take turns reading the different extracts. I'm going to start, and then, yeah, we'll have a discussion on each section. So, the gift operates as a power stronger than even military or economic power. The universal rule of law is sustained not by violence, but by the power of the gift. The world republic will be established in this way. That's just to whet your appetite a bit. From means of production to modes of exchange, a world system approach. Kojin Karatani's The Structure of World History is an astonishing work of synthetic historical theory. Karatani views world history as a history of modes of exchange. He rejects the classical Marxist view of history as a history of modes of production, to which political, religious, and cultural levels are superstructures. Rather than the three horizontal levels in Marx's model, with an economic ground floor and politics and ideology or culture as the second and third floors, for Karatani, 3 or perhaps 4 elevator shafts run vertically through the social formation, and each shaft represents a different mode of exchange. Mode A is association, or rather the reciprocity of the gift. Mode B is brute force, or rule and protection. Mode C is commodity exchange. There's also mode D, which transcends the others, but more on that later. Rather than criticize Marx, Karatani thinks it is time to complete his historical materialist project by doing for modes A and B, association and brute force, what Marx did for C, commodity exchange. Another constant of Karatani's thought is that it is always a world system approach, rather than one that takes social formations as having internal developmental processes that take priority over their external relations. So while Karatani follows Marcel Mauss in thinking that mode A, reciprocity of the gift, dominates pre-modern societies, he thinks mode A's gift exchanges arose not within, but between societies. Reciprocity is not so much a principle of community as it is a principle for forming larger stratified communities. Mode of exchange B, brute plunder and force, also has a critical role between societies. The conquered come to accept protection in exchange for plunder, and peace is kept with gestures of redistribution. Mode of exchange C is commodity exchange, or mutual consent between parties, but with neither the reciprocal obligation of mode A or the brute force compulsion of mode B. In mode C, each recognizes the other as a free being, owing nothing more to the community or ruler once the transaction is done. This freedom from constraint in mode C is constitutive of the city as a social form. There is no separate sphere of politics or culture or ethics in this theory. All historical formations include all three modes. The modes of exchange, A, B, and C, produce different modes of power, which are successively the laws of community, state, and international law. Not all forms of power are based on coercion. The reciprocal gift of mode A is also a power, and so too is the natural law of trade and money, characteristic of mode C. While Karatani implies it rather than directly states it, mode A, B, and C seem to be successive stages in scales of organization. This world systems theory actually has 3 successive stages. World mini-systems characterized the archaic world and were dominated by mode A. The world empires that subsumed them were dominated by mode B. The modern world market system is dominated by mode C. Karatani then suggests we are ready for a 4th great shift, the shift to a world republic. And we have some amazing diagrams, means developed by Leith. Do you want to talk a bit about these?
About the images, you mean?
Yeah, what were you thinking?
They're meant as like something to just like put the eye on while we discuss stuff, I guess, and also maybe make the climate of the reading group a bit lighter as well.
And what's happening in both of these? So this is...
Oh, that's the Eurovision. There was the person who was taught to be taking coke during the event.
And here we can see all 4 modes of exchange, correct?
He was actually reading this text.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Really contemplating.
And the second image is diagram, which was taken from another reading group, which was also looking at this text. But that goes a bit too deep, maybe, or like open doors that we are maybe not interested in opening. But at least it's there for further, reading maybe.
And anyone on the notion can look at these in more detail. So that brings us to the first discussion questions. What do we as Black Swan, or people interested in rethinking the creation and distribution of value in the arts, learn by thinking about history and social formations in terms of different modes of exchange? Did you have any thoughts on this, Laura?
Yeah, I guess that relates also to the question of how is this way of thinking about social formation, how does that relate closely to Black Swan, I guess. And I think it's like, as Karatani explains it and further in the book, it is a powerful shift to begin thinking modes of exchange, or rather than thinking in terms of means of production. Like Karatani suggested that social relations are in some way always in contact with an outside. They take into account externalities in ways that otherwise thinking in terms of means of production often doesn't. So it creates a way, I guess, to think a larger system that is in constant or continuous information, if you will. Like in this sense, I guess it'd be interesting to rethink the frameworks in which interactions and modes of exchange are taking place. And obviously, we've had together like a focus on blockchains and DAOs as perhaps the ways in which modes of exchange can be in some form, reprogrammed or like manipulated in some form. I don't know how you, how you take this question.
Yeah. Go ahead, Calum.
No, please.
Yeah, I was going to say I follow Laura on this. I think what's interesting about this text, and also like in the context of Black Swan, is so the biggest paradigm shift here is how externalities influence social relations, rather than the other way around, or like considering them as much more interconnected than for Marx. And I think what's interesting here is like thinking of how you can eventually create like a culture or context for different type of social relationships to sort of take root.
Definitely, and I think there's also something really nice about this metaphor of the elevator shafts versus the metaphor of the building, for kind of along these lines, seeing things as interconnected, not seeing politics, economics, culture, ideology as somehow separate and isolated, but actually seeing them as a knot. I think somewhere else in the text it's described as a knot. The elevator shafts kind of all are existing at all times, which is also an interesting way of thinking about time and temporality and history, not as this linear progression, but as something that contains unlinked fragments of time or of different modes of relation, modes of exchange. Something else that I think is really nice about this focus on modes of exchange that comes up in the introduction to the book is how it takes into account non-human processes and inhuman processes. As Laura was saying, the externalities are somewhat lost by a focus on modes of production, where if you think about the world system as a living system, a complex system, there's all these different transformations of chemicals and of energy. Like the world as a metabolism is also a system of exchange. And I think there's something nice about also, like, although Karatani's text is very focused on the human, maybe also using it as a starting point for thinking about what a non-human economy looks like, or what does it mean to organize in union with with non-human modes of exchange.
I think what's cool also about it, and I'm saying cool, is this, and that's also what gives you the biggest headache, trying to kind of like understand what he's speaking about, but it's this kind of like constant friction, both between the modes of exchange, which are always like very much intertwined, in how one necessitates the other, which kind of makes you understand that there's also like space to renegotiate those friction. But also the kind of like interconnection of, indeed, as Calum was saying, economics, politics, culture. So it's always those like, yeah, nuts. And I think what's interesting to think about is like, out of this sort of like analysis, how to push one way or the other. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a way to keep entertaining, like almost almost paradoxical ways of conceiving of exchanges, like as we say, there is a gift and there is the mode of brute force, as he discusses, but seeing how all these different ways of relating to one another and to create, to organize, exists in a way that is a lot more complex and rich than the linear way in which history is traditionally told. So it opens, I guess, the imagination to, take inspiration perhaps from different angles.
Shall we go on to mode A?
Let's do it.
Who wants to read?
Laura, there you go.
Okay, I'll do it. Mode A, the reciprocity of the gift. Since Mars and Mouse, mode of exchange A is assumed to be dominant in archaic societies, but did not really exist among nomadic peoples. They could not stockpile goods. They pooled them as pure gift. It was a society of mobility and equality. Clan society only really developed the reciprocity of the gift once there was settlement. Clan society members were made equal by the reciprocity of the gift, but were no longer free. Karatani's project, as we shall see, is to envision a return to a kind of nomadism, equal and free. With mini world systems, the great leap was from hunting to farming. Karatani opposes V. Gordon Childs' thesis of a Neolithic revolution, for whom agriculture led to fixed settlements. Karatani thinks it is the other way around. Inequality arises from the storage capacity that comes with settlement. He argues that pooling happens within a household, whereas reciprocity happens between them. Reciprocity is actually a continuum from pure gift giving to war and reprisal. He sees gifts as a way of cementing alliances for war, and war as what prevents the state from forming in pre-modern mini-world systems. In a mini-world system, war exists because there is no transcendent power over the clans. Reciprocity is an in-between. It does not dissolve the parties in a higher unity. It can lead to a federal unity, but not a state. So why did hunter-gatherers settle? Climate change. During the Ice Age, humans spread. Warming led to reforestation and declining game. The stockpiling of smoked fish led to a sedentary revolution that produced agrarian clan society, still based on a reciprocity that maintained the independence of social formations from each other. This reciprocity of the gift extends beyond the human. Magic is a form of the gift. Magic is the attempt to control another through the gift in the form of the sacrifice. Quote, sacrifices are gifts that impose a debt on nature, thereby sealing off the anima of nature and transforming it into an it with a capital I. Quote. Magic despiritualizes nature. Settlement means coexisting not only with others, but with the dead, and the attempt to placate them with gifts. The sedentary revolution is a move away from the communism of the nomad, from equality and freedom. So we have some other great images here.
So we have a bas-relief of hunters. It's the You Awake meme format. So they're speaking to their fellow hunter. telling him that he just woke up and the fellow hunter was on a trip where he saw sedentarity, feudalism, despotic state, modern society, commodity exchange, world economy, capitalism, mode B, mode C, mode D, and they're kind of wondering what he's talking about, and they need help to get the boar for dinner. And the other one is Grime, thinking that farming is really not a vibe. Yeah.
Makes sense. And yeah, well, some of the questions that we had here, to begin with, what can we learn from Karatani's breakdown of clan societies to rethink how we organize? And perhaps what can we make of, I was fascinated by the way in which they explodes in a way the concept of the gift into a mode of power that doesn't have to operate through violence, but it has a regulative kind of effect. I don't know. Yeah.
There's something very seductive about this idea of the pure gift. But the sort of like ambiguity of it is that the pure gift creates the ground for reciprocity, which then creates the ground for the mode B, so the state and brute force. So it's once again like going back to earlier comments, it's always about the sort of like friction. Yeah.
How do you both understand the gift and what reciprocity is? Or like how can we understand it today, do you think?
Well,
can you repeat the question, Calum?
I guess I'm just curious, like what reciprocity is to you. Like how would you understand it, and what do gifts look like today?
I mean, it's very hard to think of the idea of a gift or like reciprocity out of, let's say, like the traditional sort of like commodity type of exchange. This idea of the pure gift is something that can only happen, or at least like I believe, in like very specific context where there's like, let's say, a set of interpersonal relation setting the ground for or to make this possible. It's in the context of like art or design practices, I'd see like reciprocity as like workshopping, or like the same way we kind of looked at with Black Swan as skill swap and skill sharing, and that's something which kind of goes out of the sort of like mode C and allow, let's say, like a return to mode A, or at least in the kind of reciprocal mode of mode A.
Yeah, that's nice. I was thinking maybe more in relation to the digital like world, whether like open source and peer-to-peer like culture, like the cultures that develop around open source and peer-to-peer technologies could be considered some kind of like form of gift. I remember once I was before COVID times, I was at a blockchain conference and someone suggested or asked whether the code for Bitcoin that Satoshi Nakamoto released like over 12 years ago or something could be considered a gift, maybe in that sense. I don't have an answer to that, to be honest. Like I don't know like whether these are could be considered example of the gift, but definitely in the context of information sharing becomes like possible maybe to imagine type of economies that rely not on just commodity exchange.
I was going to say this again. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Calum.
No, I was just going to say that I think the key thing is really where there's an expectation for both parties to participate. Like reciprocity is about giving back. So when somebody gives something in a gift exchange system, there's an expectation that the giver will eventually receive a gift in some form. There's like an expectation of giving back. And like I've read the Marcel Mauss text, and there's this description of gift exchange as like giving the gift of giving back, like there's an obligation to return this gift that's given. And I think that's what is different in commodity exchange. In commodity exchange, there's no longer an expectation for the consumer to be giving back. You know, it's like free from the requirement of reciprocity. What were you going to say, Laura?
No, I was just thinking how that's fundamentally something that is based on trust. I guess in commodity exchange, you don't have to trust the other person. Trust in maybe in this like more even impersonal way of saying you're part of this, you know, like ways of a mode of exchange. Therefore, this gift comes with an expectation, like commodity exchange, that you don't. There's not even need of an implied trust within that specific, sociality, I would say. So I was thinking how, within the mode of the gift, within this obligation, there is also like a bond of trust that develops between or like across the participants, I guess. Do you agree, or would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's also what sustain relationship between the different social entities, right? It's like it's basically a contract, which is just like not written or maybe spoken. We have a question in the chat from Smail82, who asks, do you think it's possible to shift our relationship with the idea of productivity or redefine it away from economic, transactional?
I mean, my initial response to this question is maybe it's not about productivity, but about intercourse, which is actually how Karatani describes it. Modes of exchange are about interfacing between things. Like production, I think, is so associated with this idea of limitless growth and accumulation, and maybe instead of thinking about productivity, thinking about exchange and thinking about intercourse or thinking about entanglement frees us of some of the limitations or the negative externalities of productivity.
Well, I think also, like, I mean, productivity is like a very vague term, right? It's like productive for what? So I feel like also just like based on what you said, like productivity is like always redefined based on the context in which it like exists, right? It's like I can work like I can do a 22-hour work shift, and it's going to be very productive for a very specific purpose. But taking a good weekend off is in its own way productive also. So it's always this same way, like rest is very productive in order to then later on be productive. You know, there's like always this, it's always redefined, I feel, depending on what context you refer to. And also let's say setting the ground for like a different type of social interaction would also somehow you could also consider that productive, just not in the same manner. You just produce something else.
I would just add that perhaps there can be exchange that is not transactional also. And then, as it was saying, like what the type of production that is created there is something that maybe works very differently than the, I guess, profit-driven ways of thinking about, or like, returns of investment. So like one can open up a bit that type of space.
Like it's mentioned later, but for example, refusal can be a very efficient strategy for negotiations, for example, like productive strategy, I meant. So yeah, I feel it's a bit of it's a very tricky term.
Should we keep going? Just one final thought on this. That was a nice example, is like the creation of collective debt is also somehow a form of gift giving. Karatani mentions building a temple out of gold, the gold that could be used to fund the military, and that that act of removing the gold from circulation is the gift. and is a form of reciprocity, because then it's asking people to organize according to a different principle than brute force. And I just thought that was like, there's something, I don't know, I always previously thought about debt only in relation to like capitalist modes of exchange. And there's something interesting also about the discussion around magic and sacrifice. Sacrifice as creating a debt, or like the need to reciprocate. So if you sacrifice something, then the gods have to repay that debt. But that's the expectation.
It also came from the idea that after fixed settlements, people were not living alone anymore, but also with the dead. So then they also like had to create a new set of relationships with the dead as well. And some of them also indeed involved sacrifice and magic.
Okay, keeping an eye on time, let's go on to mode B.
Brute force. Yep. Mode B, brute force. In another of his reversal of perspective, Karatani argues that, quote, that state did not arise as a result of the agricultural revolution. To the contrary, the agricultural revolution was a consequence of the rise of the state. Trading and warfare led to city-states. These states then led to agriculture. The rise of the city cannot be separated from the rise of the state. In other words, mode of exchange B and mode of exchange C are inseparable from each other, from one another. Reciprocal conflicts hold in check the possibility of centralization. Interestingly, he views the state as the development of mode B as a form of exchange. The state is based on a non-reciprocal principle of exchange. Hobbes thought that the social contract was extorted by fear. Karatani sees it as the transformation of plunder into a mode of exchange, of plunder for protection. The state puts an end to horizontal reciprocity, an end to both gift and vendetta. States do not arise from a single community, but in the space of the world empire. The sovereign is something that comes from outside. State comes from exchange between ruling and ruled social formations. Agrarian clans, communities come after and are produced by the state. Reciprocity does not acknowledge any higher authority. Once a centralized order was established, the despotic state then tried to actively co-opt traditions dating back to clan society. This is why agrarian community organized by the despotic state took on the appearance of being a continuation of clan society. Hence, mode B depends on a modified and extended form of mode A. The agrarian community is an imagined community whose framework is provided by the despotic state, just as the modern nation cannot exist in the absence of the framework of decentralized states.
What's this meme?
Oh, that's the trade offer, but instead of the trade, there's the Leviathan. So society would give the authority and power to loot and dispose of all resources, while they would receive nothing, but they don't know it. And also the Leviathan says that they're kind of cute.
That's nice.
And then we had a question, which is, in Karatani's line of thinking, the rise of organizations such as guilds and communes, with their power based on rule and protection, and often brute force, is tightly connected to the emergence of the state. Do we see tendencies of mode B in DAOs and self-sovereign networks?
I wonder if maybe just, Laura, could you explain what a DAO is?
Yes, a DAO, so DAO stands for the Decentralized Autonomous Organization, and is a type of software-based organizational framework that is based on smart contracts and blockchains. So effectively works, it allows people to manage resources together and to make decisions on how to use these resources in a way that doesn't have to rely on the traditional legal structure. Anything that I'm missing?
I also like tying it into this discussion of trust in what we were talking about in the previous section, because the blockchain networks that underlie DAOs are often spoken about in their ability to remove the need for trust in social relations and in exchange, and so I think if we are to open up DAOs beyond capitalism, or think about what might be different ways of organizing, thinking about how trust and reciprocity can be embedded into a digital organization seems like an interesting place to start.
Yeah, there is a lot of, I guess a lot of the narrative related to some of these DAOs and blockchains has to do precisely with like self-sovereignty and autonomy, and like perhaps these early types of organizations that Karatani talks about that prefigure the states, like guilds and communes. They were like, they work in a way that internally provides some kind of like, this based on like a mutual aid kind of system, and like a community formations, but within one another, they're still like quite, I guess, atomized. So there's not that many DAOs of DAOs, I would say, or like currently ways of thinking about forms of reciprocity between some of these organizations, perhaps, and how that could open up different ways to maybe like get inspiration from these older forms of organization.
The DAOs of DAOs, the DAO union. I was also thinking it's something we discussed earlier, but this sort of like going back in time, and as we saw earlier, that so it's always like a constant game of negotiations. I believe that like the re-emergence of such organizational forms also has to do with, speaking about trust again, a sort of like a loss of trust also towards the state, for example, pushing eventually people to find spaces to organize together instead of like delegating or deferring the sort of like almost like care, I'd say. So I think there's like a interesting sort of like temporal element there as well.
Being mindful of the time, so I'm gonna keep reading. Mode C, commodity exchange. Where do administered and administering people come from? After all, people do not voluntarily choose to become bureaucrats. As Max Weber argued, a money economy is a precondition for a bureaucratic system. Just as the despotic Mode B state depends on a modified form of Mode A, it also requires the development of Mode C, commodity exchange. Money arises not within, but between social formations. Karl Marx repeatedly stressed that commodity exchange began with exchanges between different communities. The form of power of Mode C is money, which the state cannot do without. As in David Graeber, Karatani stresses the role of money in sustaining standing armies. For Karatani, money does not require a labor theory of value for its explication. The power of money is grounded in a social contract. Money is king in the same way that the king is king. The king is king because others are subjects, while they imagine they are subjects because he is king. Likewise, money is sovereign, but sovereign as an empty position that anyone can occupy. Money is minted by the state, but not by its power to circulate globally. Karatani writes, we cannot understand money only by looking at it locally, within a single country, in the same way that we cannot understand the state if we confine ourselves to the context of a single country. And in another reversal of perspective, Karatani argues that the power of precious metal money to circulate worldwide is not something owing to the state. To the contrary, the state's ability to mint money depends on this power. Karatani argues that Mode C has always existed, but was kept contained until recently by early forms of Mode A and Mode B. As with his analysis of Modes A and B, Karatani sees Mode C as arising within a world system, or between social formations, rather than within a social formation. Commodity exchange that takes place between different value systems can yield a profit. The totality of capital has to engage in an equal exchange with labor, and yet it has to extract surplus value. capital has to go outside and find new consumers. In order for the accumulation of capital to continue, it has to ceaselessly engage in the recruitment of new proletarians.
And then we have a meme. This one was not made by us. It was actually taken from the New Models Discord. So it looks at, let's say, first forms of commodity exchange, so like how it started and how it's going. So it started with someone saying, I'll just sell this tea that I bought in China to make a profit. What could go wrong? And then 1,000 years later, we have like an insane queue in front of a Supreme store. So yeah, voila.
And so the questions, can we think about the function of money in today's world economy away from profit? And what is the role of money in an imagined community based on reciprocity?
So maybe...
go ahead. No, you go.
No, I was thinking, well, I've been fascinated in reading Karatani by the idea of the imagined community that he often brings up in relation to the agrarian societies, and then in relation to the idea of the nation, which is something that is that unites people in a real way, but that is based or is within a framework that is in a sense imposed like from a higher way or order of power. But that, I guess, finds a way to, even emerge from that eventually. Like, so I'm wondering what type of imagined communities could, like, what types of imagined communities could emerge out of this particular, I guess, historical juncture, like in the structure of world history, where everything is increasingly commoditized and financialized, but then also there are like all these emergent attempt or initiatives to create alternative like systems, and so just an open kind of point probably.
Like putting together, like in relation to both questions, so can we think about the function of money in today's world economy away from profit, and what is the role of money in an imagined community based on reciprocity? I feel like it depends, like with what does, or like in what context does this community exist somehow. I feel you could totally imagine a community based on reciprocity that still needs money, and eventually an idea of money based on profit to actually sustain itself, although let's say the internal dynamics of that specific community are based on reciprocity. So I think it also really depends on like what or like who does the community interacts with, and also in what part of the community we're speaking about as well. So is it like to interface with the outside, or are we speaking of like the function of money within the same community? But from what I know, and after having participated also in communities that we could consider to be based on reciprocity, I feel like money is always like an essential parameter to actually allow this community to even exist, right? Because it doesn't like exist in a vacuum. But I feel like other dynamics or like relationships are also possible.
I'm also really interested in how you can create a money out of things that currently are not rendered commodities. Like, could knowledge, or the shared stories, lore, myths of a social group somehow become a source of value for that social group? And I guess I'm looking towards examples in decentralized autonomous organizations. There's an interesting example called One Hive, which we don't really have time to go into now, but they found a way of creating value around their community and the work they do building digital tools, without really following the normal ways of like selling a product or creating something into a product that can be sold. Anybody can claim this money, and it's released at a certain it's like distributed through a faucet, this cryptocurrency, and every day at a certain time people can claim it, and there's only ever a certain amount released each day, and so the longer you participate in the community, the more of this this currency or coin or token you'll accrue, and then you can use that to vote on things within the community, but also this token has an external market value that is kind of based, I guess, speculatively on the value of this social group and the work that they do. And yeah, I don't know if we have time to go into that. We have about 15 minutes left. So maybe we should read the next section, and then whatever we have time for, we can talk about at the end.
Sounds good.
So Mode D, World Republic. What then of Mode D? It is the polar opposite of Mode B, brute force. Mode of exchange D marks the attempt to restore the reciprocal community A on top of the market economy C. It is an ideal form that never existed in reality, although it is given expression, at least in their formative moments, by the great world religions. But perhaps this line of thought could be made rather more materialistic. In his book, Death, Graeber noted that when precious metals are used to ornament templates, it is the withdrawal from circulation of the material, of the means of making coinage that could sustain an army. The sacrifice of gold to imagine gods is thus nevertheless a real sacrifice. Karatani stresses the difference rather than continuity of religion and magic. Prayer is directed via the priest king as guardian of the portal to a transcendent God. It lacks the horizontal and egalitarian aspect of magic. The development of magic into religion was nothing other than the development from clan society to the state. But religion did not intend to be this. Universal religions originally appeared in the form of a negation of the sort of world empire and religion. As soon as they achieved the stable form, however, they found themselves appropriated into the ruling apparatus of a world empire. As Raoul Vaneigem stresses in his History of Heresy, religions are part of a history of modes of sacrifice. World empires, Mode B, need both a world religion, Mode A, and world money, Mode C. The worship of money is, to borrow Marx's language, a fetishism. And with the rise of world money, this fetishism became monotheistic. Money frees individuals from community and reciprocity. But religions are also expression of something else. In the process of empire formation, there is a moment when, under the sway of mode of exchange B, brute force, mode of exchange C, commodity exchange, dismantles mode of exchange A, the reciprocity of the gift. At this moment, and in resistance to it, the universal religion appears, taking the form of mode of exchange D. Universal religions arise when mode C has become generalized, and as Graeber shows in detail, borrow their metaphors of universality from the marketplace. Karatani's project is in essence to revive not the religious but social force of Mode D, to push once again for forms of exchange that are both free and equal, but a higher level of organization and more extensive scale. Mode D does not just restore community. It is possible only after community has been negated. It is a regulative idea that restores reciprocity after and without community. Communism depends less on shared ownership of the means of production than on the return of nomadism. Mode D has to be simultaneously free and mutual. Mode D escapes from particular social formations. The overcoming at a higher level of the capital state nation has to be realized in the form of a new world system. Karatani's argument could be broadly classified as what Benjamin Noyes calls negationist rather than accelerationist. The negation of the capital state nation world system has to come from cooperative practices and from a new imagining of Mode D. These regulative ideas about organization that arise from the different modes of exchange all have something in common, an actual infrastructure that would make them possible. They presuppose an actually existing vectoral world. The same vector, the same information infrastructure makes possible both the control and commodification, but also more abstract forms of the gift. The politics of sharing free information then becomes the leading form for thinking new possibilities.
I love how this ends.
Yeah.
Leaf, what's this mean?
Oh, this one Laura picked it.
I did.
Love it.
Yeah, we have the average planned economy fund on the left, which is, struggling, try to, distribute resources more evenly and efficiently. Like, no, always asking for a bigger computer. And on the right, you have the average gift economy enthusiast, which says, you want this, you can have it, king. Sharing is caring. Very different vibe. So
we should all be the average gift economy enthusiast.
Yeah.
It's also looking pretty good. So.
Oh yeah.
I love some dermal fillers. The gift that keeps on giving. Botox.
Wow.
So it's left super open, this mode of exchange D. And I think in the last 10 minutes, it would just make sense to discuss how we understand it and like what are some examples that we could imagine somehow becoming mode of exchange D or the return of the gift.
Yeah.
We had some stuff, fans, stands, crypto maximalists, secular cults. And then from Karatani, he actually mentions the United Nations and consumer boycotts as examples of mode of exchange D, which seem somewhat limited and also coming from like the 20th century rather than thinking about how people organize today and what actually, like what the nature of capitalism is now. And yeah, I was wondering what, because I guess Laura added some of these examples. What were you thinking?
Yeah, I was thinking that cults have become very like widespread. I would say, like there seems to be like a resurgence, perhaps. I don't know whether it is a resurgence of online culture, like secular cults that could be, the example of, Bitcoin maximalists or certain cryptocurrencies enthusiasts that, behave like fans when they talk about their favorite coin. But also on the other side, there is like also the rise of like fan cultures, like, and people like the collective being empowered in a way to even shape the directions of something, of a project that they're involved in. So I'm wondering whether there's maybe a precursor of the emergence of a mode D that would grow out of the commodity economy, like, or the acceleration of commodity economy, and creating a system that is more reciprocal, I would say.
What I find super fascinating about mode D is that it's a post mode ABC mode A. So the mode D is some sort of like return to mode A, right? And but at the same time, like he mentions that, at least at the end of the text, he speaks about the politics of sharing free information becomes the leading form for thinking new possibilities. And I'm thinking of internet communities as well as in the text he speaks of world religion as this transcendental illusion that basically goes beyond the state. And thinking of the internet, I had in mind this text from someone called Aaron Z. Lewis, The Garden of Forking Memes. That text, right, where he speaks about so how because of the web and access, or like almost like unlimited access to information, people are basically able to construct their own narrative and their own like almost like history. But that's always like a shared sense of history, right? With a specific group or like community of other people that also just goes beyond the sort of like traditional narrative kind of promoted to create the sense of a nation or like a community within the state. So it kind of like broke free from that in a way. And that's, I think that's something that is like super interesting in seeing how, in like a potential sort of like new emergence of mode D, or like a ground for like a potential emergence of mode D.
Yeah, as you were saying, for like this, the possibility to be able to create your own narrative. Maybe like the internet is a bit of a, I don't know, like cult technology, like if you, or like the possibility to create your own myths, like collective, like myths and narrative, like, it's something that I think there's, it like has to do on the one hand with what in a way has been critiqued perhaps as like fragmentation, but on the other I'm wondering whether this is necessary for we're not talking about the global homogeneous world order, or even like the internet as a homogeneous space. Creating your own narrative with your group of friends that could be at a distance, enable the creation of certain space, like digital localities, in a sense, that are perhaps only possible now, or in a way that hundreds of years ago, with certain stages of technological development, that would have not been possible. So yeah.
Also, just the development of. Oh, go ahead, Calum.
I was just going to say that I think this word federation is really key, and is also a way that we, especially in the trust context, have been thinking about digital platforms and like network topologies. It's like the federated network somehow is a push against the data extraction that is currently the like economic paradigm of the web. If you could allow for a level of interoperability, or for both people to own their data, have like governance control over the value that they create, and have ways of capturing that value, that we would somehow create a new economy. Like, I think it somehow is presented through this idea of a federated network, the possibilities of mode of exchange D. And when we were discussing earlier, we were talking about open source software and open access, and the gift of intellectual property, ideas about like what if there had been an open source vaccine. This, I guess, is what McKenzie Wark opens up to at the end, saying that it's about information, actually. The free sharing of information becomes a leading form for thinking new possibilities. But then with digital tools, we can maybe somehow design systems and organizations that take that as a starting point.
Yeah, so I think there is like both, if we speak of platforms, both, let's say, the infrastructure and shared infrastructure and shared narratives. If we speak about this idea of transcendental illusion, comparing it to world religion, I think like both seems to actually be key.
any final thoughts from our Twitch audience? We have 2 minutes left.
Which audience
We know
is
that
a little silent. Checking.
world, have your say. I'll repost the link to the Notion document, which can be looked at in more detail after the event. And yeah, we know that it's kind of a dense subject area, but we also think that it's really valuable to take these ideas as a starting point for imagination. And what we tried to do in this session is not get too caught up in where the ideas are coming from, which often is 75% of an academic text, just the citations. And we wanted to use it as a tool for the imagination. And I think that I've learned a lot going through this text. And I do think that this framing around reciprocity and gift can shift the focus of DAOs and digital organizing more generally. Did you have any final thoughts, Laura and Laith?
It's a bit fun to discuss it with a larger group as we all know each other and kind of like build some sort of like common understanding of the text. But at the same time, it's very sunny outside and it's Sunday. So I can understand if some people made other plans. That's completely legit.
Yeah, definitely. No, yeah, like just echoing like what Calum was saying about the open or the like beginning to think in a more, I guess, interdependent ways about organization rather than atomic self-organizing, like self-reflexive self-organizing. I think, I feel like I've learned a lot as well, and it's been a great inspiration to take seriously exchange as something that doesn't have to be only in one way, let's say, like the way that we know it today. So that's been great.
On that note, I think everyone should go enjoy what they
Absolutely.
can of the most abundant gift resource we have, the sun.
Yeah,
The pure gift.
The pure gift. Happy summer, everybody. And thanks for joining.
Thank you.